Good morning, and welcome to Sunday worship at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Jacksonville, where we practice spiritual closeness and physical distancing. We're so happy to have you with us this morning. I'm Blanche Williams, your worship associate for this service. Joining me as the technical administrator today is Crystal Vakes, UUCJ's tech support consultant. Other church members are also contributing to this service in important ways, both on screen and off, having donated their time and talent throughout the week to bring the service together. As usual, we'll keep the congregation muted throughout the service to minimize background noise and prevent disruptions. Even though we can't hear the sound of your voice, your presence is important to all of us. If you're a guest with us this morning, we offer a special welcome to you. We want you to know that Unitarian Universalism is a religion of diversity and inclusion. We encourage many different paths in the search for truth. Our congregation is a community of justice and love. Each week, we come together in gratitude for the chance to be with each other. Whoever you are, you, your whole family, all that you are, all that you carry, are welcome here. Now remember to check the eBlast or uucj.org for a schedule of upcoming events. There are Zoom happenings throughout the week that you'll want to know about, including book clubs, educational offerings, and special interest groups. And on a special note, while this is Reverend Paul's last Sunday with us, you still have a chance to participate in one or both of his popular classes. He will teach Unitarian Universalism Then and Now this afternoon at 2:30, and Building Your Own Theology next Sunday, July 11th at 2:30. We'll open our service this morning with a reading from two sections from the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. For the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Now UUCJ member Hope Clayton, accompanied by member Jeannie Hebner, will lead us in singing our call to worship.
Let us be grateful for this day, for friends both near and far away. With love we gather here today. Though distant, we have found a way.
The flaming chalice is a symbol of our faith, and this morning Unitarian Universalists in homes across the land are lighting their chalices. If you have a chalice or candle nearby, would you light it now and hold it up so that we can see it? And I will do the same. Imagine that each of our little flames is connected to all the other little flames flickering on screens across the land as we speak the words shown on your screen. We light this chalice flame to remind ourselves of the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. Our opening hymn is America the Beautiful. Please join in with Hope and Jeannie using the words on your screen.
Beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet who stern impassioned stress, a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness. America, America, God mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country love, and mercy more than life. America, America, may God thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness, and every gain divine. Oh, beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years, thine alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
The history of this beautiful country is one of both joy and sorrow. And in our lives today, here at UUCJ in our community, we are grateful to be able to share in each other's joys and sorrows. Let's consider these now. What is in your heart today? If you have a special joy or a special sorrow you'd like to share, I invite you to write it in the chat box and I will read it aloud. So Penny writes that Sam Lane and Leah Ward Lee were married this morning in a simple and beautiful ceremony on the beach in Fernandina Beach. Congratulations to the happy couple. And Michael writes, enjoyed a good game of Ultimate Frisbee with friends yesterday. We'll wait just a moment more in case there are others to be shared. Janella says, reading these words underlines how they perpetuate false history, ignoring the genocide of Native Americans and how the slave labor made the invasive hordes of Pilgrim rich. Yuck. Barbara tells us that their birthdays this week: Peggy Tilley on Wednesday, Stephen Stagon on Friday, and Jay Hebner on Saturday. And belated birthday greetings to Mary Lou Boyer last Friday. You can continue to write joys and sorrows in the chat box during the service if you would like. We honor those that have been shared with us this morning and all those that remain unspoken in our hearts.
Let us join our hearts and minds in a spirit of meditation. Our many different paths come together at this special time in our nation's history, graced by the history of our country's founding ideals and of the ideals of our free church heritage. So this day, let us be mindful of forces deep within which call us to become more than we are in terms of these ideals. May this hour bring rest and renewal, comfort, celebration, and challenge. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to others. And may we know once again that we are not isolated, but we are connected in mystery and in miracle to this universe, to our country, to our community, to each other. Thinking of these things, let us be together for a period of silence. Amen.
In the Declaration of Independence, it is written, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." Our loving community, UUCJ, operates on a similar pledge that we make to each other, that we give of ourselves, our treasure, our principles. At this time, we ask for your financial contribution, which you can make by using the web address on your screen, clicking on the link that will appear in the chat box, or mailing a check to the church office. As we virtually pass the offering plate, please enjoy this rendition of America the Beautiful, played by the Inter-Service Saxophone Quartet. In October 2020, Reverend Dr. Paul Johnson joined us as our interim minister, and since that time has led us and served us pandemic style from his home in Stuart, Florida. He helped us to maintain our focus through these difficult months. He taught us, he advised us, he laughed with us. Some of you know him mainly through the worship services he led, while others have partaken of his classes, received his pastoral care, worked with him on administrative or committee matters, or talked theology, philosophy, and books with him. Today is his last Sunday with us, and we want to say to him, thank you, goodbye, and best wishes. Here's a video of tribute, and when it ends, the president of the congregation, Vince Ober, will say a few words.
Thank you. What a great tribute. As board president, I've had the opportunity to work closely with Reverend Paul over the last 6 months and been on the board with him in the last 10 months. What a great pleasure. He really likes being a Unitarian minister. He likes UU theology, and he shared a lifetime of study and experience with us. He likes people. He's participated in almost all of UU activities, whether they be committees, book clubs, study groups, committees, board activities. He's been a valuable pastoral counselor for some, and he has been a great minister for all of us. And he's done this in a setting of a pandemic when everything had to be done virtually. But his attitude has been, we can do this. And he's done it very well. He's brought so much to UCJ. We've been fortunate to have him here during the last year. He's leaving for a fourth-time job with the UU Church in West Melbourne. They are lucky to have him as their minister, and we wish him well. And the board, on the behalf of the congregation, has a gift for Reverend Paul, a reproduction of this painting, Morning on the River, to remember his time, his virtual time here in Jacksonville.
Well, thank you so much, Vince and Blanche, and all of you for those wonderful comments. My goodness, I'm gonna have to keep this recording, and on days when I need it, I'm gonna replay it. That's fantastic. And thanks for the gift as well. That'll have an honored place in our living room. But it's been a pleasure to be with you in all of the ways that you've mentioned. You have been so responsive to my ministry and appreciative. I certainly will never forget you, and hope that someday I'll be able to meet you in person. Now, I've talked with your incoming minister, Reverend Leanne Washington, about this. She said, well, sometime in the future, I'd be open to that. And I certainly hope that will come to pass. But I think you've got a wonderful minister coming on board. She will officially start on August 15th. And the month of August is a vacation month for me. So I guess I'll technically still be your minister until August 15th. But then on that date, she becomes the minister and the person who you look to for ministerial guidance and work in the congregation. So thanks again for the wonderful experience, very unusual experience we've had these past months together, and best wishes to all of you. So we come to the sermon. You know, in 1922, the British man of literature, G.K. Chesterton, wrote a piece after his visit to the U.S. in which he was so impressed with the egalitarian nature of our society that he said that he believed us to be the nation with the soul of a church. He claimed that the U.S. is the only nation in the world that is founded on a creed which is set forth in dogmatic and even theological lucidity in the Declaration of Independence. Now, I don't know if that's true, but it certainly was his opinion, and it certainly is the case. Blanche read earlier, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. That was a copyist error, by the way. It should be inalienable. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of people to alter or abolish it and to institute a new government. You know, this last Friday morning, all of the NPR morning news people took turns reading portions of the entire declaration. And it was inspiring to hear the whole thing. What an interesting document and wonderful document. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, of course, but I want to read some of the things that Jefferson mentioned about George III in ways that he had been tyrannical. These are some that are particularly salient. Number one, he has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasion of their rights. 3, he has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. 4, he has erected a multitude of new offices and sent swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. And 5, he has cut off our trade with all parts of the world and imposed taxes on us without our consent. And of course, that was one of the big issues, taxation without representation. Of course, when Great Britain wanted to recoup some of its expenses for this continent, they instituted these taxes, the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act and the Townshend duties. But they were all eventually withdrawn. And why, you may ask? It's because the colonists determined to boycott British goods because of them. The amount of British goods purchased in this country went down by over 2/3 until those taxes were rescinded. So this is a creed, the belief in the way things should be in recognition of human equality. But what did they mean? Jefferson, as the author, and the 56 men who signed the Declaration, what did they mean by equality of all persons? Certainly it wasn't native genius or talent or physical ability or family resources. What did they mean by this? Well, we know something for sure. We know that Jefferson was very much influenced by the idea of English philosopher John Locke. And among his principal ideas were the idea that no person has a right to rule over another person. And this, of course, was the jab at the doctrine of the divine right of kings, a doctrine that had been foisted on humankind, which had no basis in the natural law, according to Jefferson. So many of the royal lines and nobilities in Europe came into being through skullduggery of all sorts. They certainly did not represent divine will. A logical extension would have been, of course, that no one had a right to hold another person in slavery. But our founding fathers were not at that point. And why not? And of course, I've read the works of Jefferson and some of the other founding fathers. And what I have come to is they didn't think that certain people had full humanity warranting full human rights. That was racism. I'm much taken with another idea that Jefferson had received from Locke, that all of us are born with tabula rasa, a blank slate, that we only come to understanding through experience, through our senses. This is different, of course, than Socrates and Plato, who believe that each of us have a soul which pre-existed in a heavenly realm and came into the body with existing knowledge. No, said Locke, all people are equal and that they are born with a blank slate. This was important for Jefferson, who believed that education was a requisite in a republic. His number one signature accomplishment on his tombstone is that he was founder of the University of Virginia. He claimed to Madison that this would be a seminary, essentially the educator for the civil religion of the republic, the religion of human equality. Now, for Christians, the basis for equality was the teaching of St. Paul, that in Christ there was no male or female, slave or free, all were children of God. Unfortunately, this did not mean, according to St. Paul, that slavery should be abolished, but it meant that in the spiritual realm, there was equality. Now, it's also important that Jefferson held to the teachings of the Scottish natural rights philosophers that every person has a capability of moral discernment, which comes through experience. As we experience the world, we come to understand that certain actions are right and certain actions are wrong. Certain things are self-evident, as is the case with all persons being created equal. If you were to ask me, well, I believe in this doctrine. Well, why do you believe in it? Well, I don't necessarily believe in it because of natural rights philosophy or because of divine revelation. I believe it because it's true to my experience of how much human misery are caused when basic equality in terms of political equality, even economic equality, social equality are not recognized. And therefore, it behooves us, as it says in our first UU principle, to honor the inherent worth and dignity of every person and justice, equity, and compassion in human relationships. But it's amazing to me when I think back of it, and perhaps with you as well, that this equality before the law was only applied to free men of certain amount of property, not women, not to slaves, not to indentured servants, not to Native Americans. In some jurisdictions, even Catholics were not allowed political freedom to vote, and in some cases, not even allowed to have property. It was a very restrictive form of equality, was it not? And this has always been a bit of a mystery to me. That's such a small portion of our population in those days had political equality. Even though Jefferson said in his first inaugural address, he said, the first thing we have to deal with is human equality and equal justice before the law. So what in the world was he thinking? Well, books have been written on that subject, but to me, the thing that we can thank Jefferson for is that he planted a seed of the notion of human equality that has grown. Unitarians Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony harked back to the Declaration of Independence in their work for women's legal rights, especially the right to vote, claiming that all men are created equal actually meant all men and women are created equal, and ultimately their cause was successful, though not in their lifetimes. And wasn't that a tragedy that they never saw the fruit of their labors? I think that's one of the most terrible things in our history. But Unitarian minister Theodore Parker in his abolition work harked back to the Declaration, as did Lincoln, as did Martin Luther King. And think of all of the work for equality that has claimed the Declaration as a source. The right of marriage for same-sex couples, for instance, or equality of treatment for people despite their age or despite their disabilities. The signers of the Declaration didn't want to get into the area of economic equality. Some have suggested that might be because it might destroy their freedom to become wealthy. I don't know if that was the case, but think how this has become an issue, bringing equality into the area of economics in terms of equal access to public education. Sometimes I wonder, how did we ever, within our country, get to the idea of universal public education? Or we're dealing now with the issue of medical care and food and shelter. And how can there be a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness without access to these goods? To so many people, the overriding issue is if you can't afford it, you don't deserve it. It's such a hotly contested issue in terms of equality in our day. I think it's such a shame that so many states have refused to expand Medicaid coverage. Very small costs for the states, and millions more people would be covered. The last I checked, 37 states and the District of Columbia have expanded Medicaid coverage, but many states have not, including our state of Florida. And I hope that all of you will be out there garnering signatures so that we can get this on the ballot for the election in 2022 to amend the state constitution to call for expansion of Medicaid coverage. It's disastrous that the citizens of the state of Missouri voted for this, and then the state legislature would not fund their state's portion of the cost. Even though now during the pandemic, the 10% that they would have to pay would be wiped out. Think of that. What a tragedy that is in terms of equality. Another area that's always bothered me is equal access to legal representation. In my first congregation in Minnesota, I was a volunteer with the Brown County Information Referral Service. And one of the things we did was refer people without adequate resources to the local bar association's pro bono system, where they would be given assistance. And there was a list that we would have to follow when each lawyer's turn came up. And my boss, I guess he wasn't my boss per se, but the person in charge of the operation said to me, "Now what, Paul, this lawyer, and this lawyer are really good at covering the rights and the interests of the engine. But these others are very, very poor. But you can't tell these people that you're referring which ones are good and which ones are bad. If they got a bad lawyer, you just got to grin and bear it and hope for the best." But I remember what a change there was when the Legal Services Corporation got greater funding from the Carter administration, and we were able to refer folks to get much improved legal services. Now, I've looked to see how legal services is doing. And of course, it's not getting the same support from our Congress. And so often, equality of access to legal services has been woefully underfunded. Something so important if we're going to fulfill our soul as a nation. You know, I have to say that we've so often sinned as a nation in terms of the biblical sense of the meaning of that word sin. Harmatian, which means to miss the mark, an archer missing the mark at the target. We missed the mark as to the meaning of that. And even among Unitarians, think of the Unitarian John Adams, who brought into being the Aliens and Sedition Acts, which allowed him to imprison those who criticized him. Thankfully, reversed by Jefferson when he came into office. We think of the Red Scare of the early 20th century, which denied due process. We think of the internment of Japanese Americans during the Second World War. We think of the injustices during the McCarthy era. We think of the illegal and immoral use of torture during the H.W. Bush presidency, contrary to our laws and to international treaties. We think of the unequal enforcement of drug laws. And we think of the too big to jail phenomenon in the wake of the financial crisis in 2009 and 2010. We think right now of the issues of voter suppression. That's such a live issue in our country. So on this, our national birthday, let us celebrate the progress we have made in incarnating our national creed and renew our commitment to increasing equality. It's right up at the top of our Unitarian Universalist values. You know, on July 2nd, which John Adams felt was going to be the day of the Declaration of Independence, he was off by a couple of days. It was actually July 4th for the approval, not July 2nd. But he said the date would be celebrated by solemn prayers with pomp and circumstance and games and sports and bonfires and fireworks, because it was a day that would live forever in our national life. And it certainly has, hasn't it? It is a day of celebration when we stop to think that it represents our soul. Mircea Eliade, the great historian of religion, who I got to know personally when I was at the University of Chicago. He had his office at the Meadville Lombard building, and I bumped into him again and again in our library. But his principal gift to the history of religion area was that for all religions, sacred time and sacred space have an important part. There are sacred times which are celebrated. It's a reenactment of originations. And that's what July 4th is to us. It's a reenactment of our origination. And therefore, it has a particular important place in our civil religion. Now, I had a wonderful experience back in 1975 where sacred time and sacred space came together. I had just gone to Washington, D.C. to work with our Washington Office for Social Concern with the UUs. And I was there for July 4th, 1975. The Vietnam War had ended. The celebration then was below the Washington Monument, between the monument and the Lincoln Memorial. And of course, Jefferson's Memorial was off to the left as you face the Lincoln Memorial. That certainly was sacred space. and hear the speeches and hear the bands play and take part at a snake dance involving thousands of people to the tune, I was transported into a time of sacred time and sacred space, celebration of our national soul. One other thing I wanted to say, as we look at the Continental Congress, the words that Blanche read about their pledging their life, their sacred honor and their property. The fact was that if the Americans had lost the war, they would be goners. They would have been hung as traitors. So they put everything on the line. It was a courageous act of faith to sign that document and wave it in the nose of the king. But of the 56 men who signed the declaration, 5 were captured by the British. Some historians say they were tortured. Some historians say they weren't. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons in the war. Another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 died from wounds or hardships arising from the war. Carter Braxton, a wealthy plantation owner and trader from Virginia, had his ships seized by the British Navy. He sold his property to pay his debts and died in poverty. At the Battle of Yorktown, British General Cornwallis had ordered the home of Thomas Nelson to be taken as his headquarters. Nelson quietly asked Washington to fire on his home. The home was destroyed, and Nelson died bankrupt. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she lay dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and mill were destroyed, and for over a year he lived in forests and caves. And after the war, he returned home to find that his wife had died and his children were scattered, and he died a few weeks later from exhaustion. So there was a remarkable amount of sacrifice done and martyrs to the cause of our national soul. But in putting together this sermon, I said, I want to go beyond the Declaration of Independence this Sunday and speak about something else that's close to my heart. And that is what I consider to be our national hymn, America the Beautiful, which underlies, I think, the nation with the soul of a church. We've probably sung this scores, if not hundreds of times. Perhaps most of us know the first verse, at least by heart. And I remember a few years ago reading about how children sort of came into an understanding of the actual words over time. One woman wrote that she thought the words were, "Oh, beautiful for spaceship guys." And there was a 3rd grader who drew a picture of a jumbo jet laden down with oranges and grapes and bananas, and told his teacher that his artwork was the fruited plain, Plane. But of course, that hymn has gotten us through some of our bleakest moments of wartime, and assassinations, and national tragedies such as 9/11. And I heard it so many times during the 9/11 tragedy that I began to wonder what in the world is meant by some of the things mentioned in the hymn, such as alabaster cities. What is alabaster cities? How many of you know what alabaster cities refer to? Any of you? So you're going to learn something new. You are. This was written, of course, by Catherine Lee Bates. She was a professor at Wellesley, English professor, who got a summertime job out at a college in Colorado Springs. And so she took off by train, of course, going first to Niagara Falls, and she wrote a poem about the beauty of the falls. And then on to Chicago, where she attended with her friend the World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition, which was a celebration of the 400th anniversary of the discovery of the New World. And it was an international spectacle, a giant showcase of the very best of the United States. And of course, its centerpiece was an architectural utopia conceived of as a model city of the future. 14 gracefully coordinated buildings around a central court of honor, finished with stucco to make it look like marble, was painted bright white. And the effect was dazzling, especially at night when thousands of incandescent lights, new, of course, relatively new, made it glow. So the white city of Chicago became the impetus for decades of urban beautification around the nation. That was the Alabaster City, Chicago, at the World's Fair. Well, she left the World's Fair on a Tuesday, which happened to be Independence Day, and she, went by train across the country, where she experienced the spacious skies. She experienced the amber waves of grain. And then towards the end of the summer, all the visiting teachers were brought to a trip to Pikes Peak, Pikes Peak, 3 miles high. And she looked out on the purple mountain majesties and the fruited plain. And after that trip to Pikes Peak, she went back to her hotel room and wrote out the song, America the Beautiful. And it was published 2 years later, July 4th, 1895, in the Congregationalist, a Boston church publication, and has become, of course, very important in our national life. It was put to many different tunes, including Auld Lang Syne. I've gone through my mind, what would it be like to sing it to the tune of Auld Lang Syne? But it was often sung to that tune and many other tunes. But finally, Augustus Ward's tune, "Oh Mother, Dear Jerusalem," was chosen and became the standard that we have with us to this very day. But the main themes of America the Beautiful are the ones Bates explored all her life, the wonders of nature, of her own country in particular, how beautiful it is and how wonderful it is to experience the beauties of our country. The vitality of our nation, its treasured past, and its infinite potential in the future. Each of the stanzas has an opening celebration of something of our national life, and then a brief prayer, and then a challenge to make something better. Isn't that interesting? An opening celebration, a brief prayer, and a challenge to make something better. In the first stanza, she talks about the amber waves of grain and purple mountains and the beauty. And then the fact God shed his grace on thee. But then to make things better, she said, crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea, an aspiration. Now, I'm told that when Wellesley students sing this, they always say sisterhood. Perhaps in this day and age, we should say siblinghood. But that's the first stanza. The second one, "Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet, whose stern impassioned stress a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness." The heritage of freedom, which has been brought across the land. And she got a lot of criticism, of course. Well, how about the way the Native Americans were decimated? And how about slavery? And she inveighed against those in our history. But she said, America, America, God, mend thine every flaw. And that's what she said. We want these flaws of our history to be mended in the future. And we want our souls to be confirmed in self-control and our liberty in law. And then she spoke about, oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, for more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. Now, I've read that her first iteration of her poem explicitly referred to both the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. But then she goes on to state a prayer. May God thy gold refine. She was concerned about the excesses of the Gilded Age and economic injustice. And she wanted the wealth to be refined, so that all success be nobleness and every gain divine. And then she said, oh, beautiful perpetuate dream that sees beyond the years, thine alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears. And I said to myself, what do you mean undimmed by human tears in our cities? There have been a lot of things to cry about. One of the things she did when she was in Chicago was to visit Jane Addams at Hull House and become better acquainted with the tears of urban Chicago. But what she was referring to here, that though these tears are there, they don't dim our view of the future, of possibilities, of infinite possibilities for good, for our nation, that our soul is developing in new and important ways in terms of our ideals. So there you have it, our national hymn speaking to the soul of our nation. Now, I said, let's just be reminded again of what she was actually talking about in terms of the themes that were so important to her. The theme of the wonders of nature in our nation, the vitality of our nation, its treasured past, and its infinite potential for the future. I want to close with a wonderful statement that I came across a number of years ago that was made in an impromptu statement by President Lincoln on February 22nd, 1861, when he was visiting Independence Hall. He said, "I have never had a feeling politically which did not spring from the sentiments embodied in the Declaration of Independence. I have often pondered over the dangers which were incurred by the men who framed and adopted the Declaration. I have pondered over all that was endured by the officers and soldiers of the Army to achieve that independence. I have often inquired of myself what a great principle or ideal it was that kept this Confederation so long. It was not the mere matter of separation of the colonies from the motherland, but the sentiment in the Declaration of Independence, which gave liberty not alone to the people of this country, I hope, but to the whole world for all future time. It was that which gave promise that weight would be lifted from the shoulders of all men. This is a sentiment embodied in the Declaration of Independence." Catherine Lee Bates was criticized that she didn't have a stanza about bringing the American dream internationally to the rest of the world. And she said, well, there's already 4 stanzas, that's enough. But she says, imagine with me that she's talking about from sea to shining sea, from the Pacific Ocean going west, all the way around the world for political, personal equality. That gospel will be shared with all. So may it be. So may it be on this very special day. Amen. Let us join together in singing our closing hymn.
Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. Oh, there'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm born. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm born. And there'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm born. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound.
Receive then these closing words. The blessing of the truth of our forebears be upon us. The power of love direct us and sustain us. And may the peace of this religious community abide with us until we meet again. So may it be. Amen.
I invite you to hold your chalices up to the camera again. And together, let's say the words shown on the screen and extinguish them. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And now would you please join me in repeating our affirmation? Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with one another. Our service has ended, and now we invite you to an opportunity for fellowship. Rather than breaking into small groups, we'll keep everyone together